everyone, and welcome to Voices of the River webinar series. This is episode 10, and we've got Pete Devery. He's going to be speaking on challenges of angling in a growing sewage crisis. Pete is a keen angler and conservation advocate with a 30-year career in corporate communications and public relations. He witnessed firsthand the decline of his local fishing spot along the Pang Chalk Stream and began campaigning for clean water. He now works for the Angling Trust as the Environment Communications Officer, helping the Trust to protect rivers, lakes, and coastal waters, and encouraging sustainable angling practices. He strives to engage audiences through storytelling, public outreach and action, and inspiring others to take action for conservation in their local water habitats. Thank you for joining us, Pete. We really look forward to hearing your presentation.
Thank you for the introduction, Jennifer. When you put it all like that, it sounds quite impressive, doesn't it? And probably more impressive than I feel it does. So as Jennifer said, just to recap a wee bit of sort of personal background of why I got into the river campaigning. I'm sat here in Sonning-on-Thames, which is on the River Thames, obviously. And about 10 miles that way is the River Pang. And the Pang is one of the tributaries of the River Thames. The Pang supposedly is one of the real Wind in the Willows rivers. There's a lot of debate about which rivers were the actual, or which river was the actual Wind in the Willows river. Kenneth Graham spent a lot of time just another 2 locks downstream from here in Cookham, where I think his family lived. But I'm sticking to the story that the Pang is the real Wind in the Willows River, because he also spent his summer holidays with his auntie in Pangbourne. And if you know the story of the Wind in the Willows, it's a lot more likely that it's a river like the Pang than it is a river like the Thames. One of the things about the Pang is that it's a chalk stream. It is a fantastic little chalk stream. It's not a big fancy river test, river itch, and in most places you could take a good jump across it. It is a tiny little river, and it's not even as big or glamorous as the other Berkshire chalk stream, the Kennet. But it is a wonderful little river. It's got a wonderful ecology, and I've been fishing on it since 2005, 2006. And for the first 15 years, let's say, it was a wonderful place to fish. It really was quite amazing. It was a, tiny little chalk stream, crystal clear. You could see every trout in it. You could see every pebble of gravel on the bottom. The ecology, dozens of kingfishers. You would always see other wildlife when you went down there. You really, even an angler like myself on the right day couldn't miss. I once sat or stood underneath a tree just down on our stretch, just down from the little bridge, and I didn't move my feet for 2 hours. And in that 2 hours, I stopped counting at 24 fish. So in 2 hours, I literally didn't move my feet and just cast it into the little run in front of me, and I caught. I stopped counting at 24 fish, and that was on a mayfly day when clouds of mayfly were blooming. You really, as I say, you couldn't miss. It was Duffer's fortnight, and it just, when I thought back on that, it was recently I did an interview, and I thought back to that time. I thought, when was the last time I saw the Pang like that? And it was before lockdown. It was 2019, maybe in the lockdown year, maybe 2020. And it has rapidly declined since then. So, and I will move on from the Pang in a minute, but I wanted to help understand why I'm involved in river conservation and doing work around helping the rivers through the Angling Trust.
Yeah.
I thought back to that time, and I thought, it hadn't dawned on me. I hadn't realized that it had gone downhill so quickly. And then I kept getting, I'm the secretary for the club, and I kept getting messages in from folks saying, have you caught any fish this year? Have you been down the river? Why is it this color? And this happened over several years. The river just declined. So in 2015, the Pang was rated by the Environment Agency as being in good condition. And the ratings for that work in the way that the lowest rating determines the whole rating for the river. So there's ratings for water quality, chemical quality, invertebrate life, abstraction, industry impact, etc. There's about 8 or so measures. And if you were to score good in one measure and poor in another measure, the river would be rated as poor. It's the lowest measure that counts. So in 2015 was the last time that the Pang was rated as good. It went to moderate the next year. It stayed at moderate for about 4 years, and no longer than that, about 6 years or so. And then 2 years ago, it was rated as poor by the Environment Agency. And the number one reason, the only reason identified, the only industry identified as having an impact on the river was the water services industry, i.e., the sewage coming out of the works on the Pang. The Pang has 5 sewage works on it. As I say, it's a tiny, tiny little chalk street. It's got 5 sewage works on it. 2 of those sewage works are in the headwaters, Compton and Hampstead Norreys. And because they're in the headwaters, it's even more of a tiny little stream up there. In the summer, the source of the Pang River is the effluent that comes out of Compton sewage works. There is no flowing water above the sewage works. Below the sewage works, there is flowing something. Whether you can describe that as water is debatable. And through the Angling Trust, so the first thing I did with the Angling Trust is I got involved with what's called their Water Quality Monitoring Network. And I'll go on and describe these in a wee bit more detail. So I got the kit, our club got the kit from the Angling Trust, and we started to test the waters, just first of all down in where we fish, which is right down the very bottom end of the Pang, near Pangbourne itself, just a few hundred meters above where the confluence with where the Thames is. That's where our fishing patch is. And the results weren't great. They were normally pretty poor. You were normally getting a phosphate reading of 0.6s, 0.9s, when it should be 0.3. The ammonia reading was generally a bit higher than it should be, and certainly into the fish damage range. Ammonia above 0.3 parts per million will start to damage fish's gills. Above 0.6, you'll start to get gills bleeding. 0.9, you're getting into the point where the gills will be deoxygenated. They'll be grey. The fish will really be starting to suffer. And those are the kind of results that we were getting back from the lower Pang. And then what I started to do was go up to, I just one day thought, hey, why don't I drive right up to the source and do these same tests as far as up to the source as I can. Sort of know the river and know where it used to be the source, and it's not as high up anymore because there's not as much water. Until last winter, there wasn't as much water in it. And so I found the first flowing water in the Pang, which this was 2 summers ago, and it was below Compton Sewage Works. So I tested it there with my little green parts, phosphate meter and my little yellow ammonia meter, and they couldn't measure it. They both went up to 2.5, which is the top of the scale on both of my little readings. So 2.5 on both of them, straight off the chart. I had never seen the little phosphate vials that we use. I'd never seen one go blue. And this thing was bright blue. And I was like, oh, have I done something wrong? What have I done here? The same with the yellow, with the phosphate, with the vials for ammonia, it went bright yellow. And then I waded up the river and I was like, hang on a minute, this isn't actual river. This is what's coming out of that sewage works. And then waded further up and the river dries up. So as I say, back then, not now because there's been so much rain last winter, but back then, the source of the River Pang was the effluent that came out of Compton sewage works. And if a little chalk stream, a wind in the willows chalk stream, starts its life with the effluent from a sewage works, what chance does it have?
No.
What chance does it have? It's a tiny, you can see the algal blooms from the satellite pictures on Bing Maps or Google Maps. You look below Hampstead Norreys and you look below Compton Sewage Works, and the vegetation is bright green. The sewage fungus up there is just permanent all year round, but it gets an awful lot worse in the winter. So that's how I got, and I was using the box of Angling Trust tests, the test kit, to go and do my thing on the Pang, and then things changed at work, and thankfully I didn't need to commute into London every single day again, but I knew I needed to do something, and a job came up with the Angling Trust and their communications team, working with the campaigns team on things like the water quality monitoring network, our litter campaigns, and all of our environmental campaigns. So if you don't mind, I will start sharing my screen and take you through a bit of the work that it is that I do with the Angling Trust. And hopefully you'll be able to understand from that what it is that, as the Angling Trust, we're trying to achieve, and how we can also partner with other folks like the Even Load Partnership Group and members of the public as well. Can you see my screen there?
Yeah.
Great stuff. So as I mentioned, one of our key environment campaigns is our Anglers Against Pollution campaign. We have about 800 volunteers who have a yellow box. It's not here, it's in the boot of my car. Yellow box full of what I call 5 high school experiments, science experiments. We, as you may have seen, we test phosphate, nitrates, ammonia, temperature, and EEC, which is a reading of turbidity. Across the country, we've got about 800 volunteers. We're now up to about 300 rivers, about 200 and so catchments. We've now done just under 8,000 tests. What we do from those tests is we enter it all on a database, EpiCollect, which is sort of standard science database. And then we can do an analysis of all the numbers that all the people are feeding in from all the rivers around the country to produce an annual report. And last year's annual report is linked in here, and I'll share all this afterwards so you can see it. And, surprise, surprise, what that report told is that 86%, I think it was, of rivers that we tested failed on phosphate. And phosphate, nitrate, ammonia are the key ones for fish and for basic ecology in the river, because they affect everything that the river feeds on, all the bugs, all the plants, everything else in the river needs is affected really by these 3 components, pollution components. And they don't tell you that that is sewage pollution or that that is agricultural pollution. It just is a marker of pollution in the river. But when you can then, i.e. on the Pang, trace it back to the fact there are 2 sewage works at the top end and they have spilled for 2,200 hours and 1,300 hours that winter, you can then, and with your angling brain or citizen scientist brain, start to piece together, when I did this test, it had been raining heavily for the week before, the sewage spills have been going on for 5 days, etc. And that really starts for us as the Angling Trust to be able to build up a big picture of where is suffering, which rivers are suffering worse, etc. As I say, the annual report shows about 80% of the rivers failed on phosphate, and we identified a few key spots as well. One was on the Medway down in Kent. It goes through Canterbury. There's basically some knackered old sewage works there, as there are all around the country, but it really affects the Medway. The Ribble and the Swale up in Yorkshire in the north. The chalk streams down here in the south, primarily because of population pressure, sewage works again, and also the River Severn. I'll also share alongside this, I'll share a piece that we did in the Guardian newspaper just a couple of weeks ago about the River Severn. And the River Severn's been a wee bit overlooked. It is Britain's mightiest river. It's our longest river, I believe, in England. And it, by volume, the biggest river. It's a bit bigger than the Thames. And it's been a wee bit overlooked because it goes through 2 countries. It starts off in Wales, it then goes through England, it goes through multiple counties as well. As opposed to a little river where, like the Pang, it only goes through 1 county, there's only 1 water company that's responsible for it. it's a lot easier to look at and manage a small river like that than it is a huge catchment, massive catchment like the Severn, where there's 3 water companies involved. Back to the actual campaign itself is, so we feed all this into a database, and our volunteers are trained in what to do when they spot pollution as well. And that's where I'd like to ask for some of your help. The key one here is a category 1 incident. If there are multiple dead fish, and multiple means more than one, doesn't mean hundreds, it means more than one, the EA must attend a category 1 incident. So if you were to walk along the Avonlode, the Windrush, any of your local rivers, and you would see dead fish, and you were to report that to the Environment Agency, they must attend that because it's a category 1 incident. And what we're seeing more and more over the last couple of years is some really bad incidents where the EA haven't attended. We have a multiple fish kill incident on the River Tyne, which is probably the UK's premier salmon river at the moment. There were multiple dead salmon, multiple dead days, and the Environment Agency didn't attend. They didn't attend for 72 hours. And by that time, of course, the pollution's gone. It's almost pointless them turning up. But we keep fighting, we keep gathering the evidence, and we keep the pressure on the Environment Agency and the other agencies, the water companies, etc., that are responsible for this. The other thing I'd just quickly on what you can do is take pictures, get a what 3 words location, describe it, write down and describe it. Is there a smell? Is there cloudiness in the river? Is there other stuff visible? Is there other pollution visible? Is there anything else? Are the birds suffering or anything like that? The more evidence you can gather at that place at that time, the more helpful it is. There's a couple of other things that we do for our environment campaigns as well, and this is one where we're really trying to address litter. We have an Anglers Against Litter campaign. We've got 180 clubs that are involved with this. We partner with people like the canoe associations and stand-up paddlers so that we can do big volunteering tidy up ops. We actually received the Keep Britain Tidy Award for it. And one of the things I'd like to try and impress upon people is the vast majority of litter that we collect through these schemes is not angling related. As a communications guy, I also look at all the different coverage that comes in from all the different newspapers and radio stations around the country. The number 1 story about the angling community is fishing litter left by rivers that then entraps birds, or gets caught in a dog's paw, or is just left hanging from trees and things like that. That is exactly the kind of thing that we as the trust trying to encourage good anglers not to do, to encourage best practice. Things like giving out free litter picking kits, things like organizing big volunteering days to clear up patches. The majority of the litter that we collect, way, the majority of the litter that we collect is not angling related. It's fizzy drink bottles, cans, beer cans, crisp packets, vapes, the usual suspects of litter that you would see on the bankside. But we totally understand there is very emotive when you see a swan with a bit of fishing line wrapped around its leg, etc. And we do have responses whereby we can get in touch quickly with the Environment Agency, with local wildlife agencies, etc., to get out and help whether that situation is happening or whether it's reported to us. We also have a big national line recycling scheme. So, and I hate to put it in simple terms like this, but good anglers know these things. Good anglers don't want to leave kit lying about. They don't want to lose line. They don't want to lose lures and floats and things like that, because those things cost money. And it's also where the angler is going to go to the next time and try and catch a fish. They don't want to be surrounded by litter and junk. So the vast majority of anglers will actually take time. We have a Take 5 campaign where they'll take 5 minutes before or after they've been fishing to clear up the litter, not just angling litter, all litter that they see. Again, what can your role in that be? One, I would say reporting any pollution, litter, dead fish, etc., keeping that reporting going. But also, if you were to see a problem area, let the Angling Trust know about it. You can go onto our website, contact us, and tell us about any sort of problems like that. You'll have my contact details. We really try and work very, very hard to educate anglers not to leave angling litter lying about, and also to address it where we know there are problems. And there are some problem areas, not in the lovely Evenlode River, etc., but some of the really, really pressured bits of water in East London, etc., where there's kids going out fishing along. The other thing I would say I would point the finger at is the AliExpress and Temu angling kit, which is so cheap to buy. You can buy dozens and dozens of lures for the price of one real proper lure. And what's going to happen is when you use that cheap kit, it's going to break, it's going to snap off, it's going to end up in a tree, or worse, stuck in a fish that's broken you off. So, these are the things that we work actively against. And as I say, good anglers don't do that thing. You would normally find that those kind of issues are generated by the anglers who don't have an angling license. Which moves me on to wildlife and countryside crime. And all of these things are related, not obviously the sewage pollution, but other types of effects on the rivers. They tend all to be related. One of the key ones for us is fish theft and theft of fishing rights. So you may have a slightly romantic view of a poacher being an old guy with a pipe and a green coat who's sneaking about in after hours, pinching a fish out of a river. That's not what's happening nowadays. These are organized groups who are the same groups who are driving across farmers' fields, lamping for hares, hare coursing, thieving farm equipment, etc. Whenever we work with the police on fish theft or infringement of fishing rights, it is normally with groups that are known to them. Obviously, we report that. We have about 700 voluntary bailiffs around the country working on different rivers, working in partnership with clubs, fishing clubs, the police, and the Environment Agency. Again, any type of thing that you see going on, report it to the police. It is a crime. Even I've had to explain that to policemen. On the River Pang, we every year about May get lots of poachers turning up because they know it's the time to easily catch a fish. We report that to the police, and in some instances, the police come out. Some they don't. They're usually a bit slow. And in most cases, when the police have turned up and there's still the poachers there, they've just told them to go away. They've not asked for their fishing license. They've not taken any of their details, even though it is a crime. Even if they've not caught a fish, theft of fishing rights is a crime. And it leads to other crimes as well. It leads to other social problems, whether that be at one end littering, or the other end, theft of really expensive equipment from farms. These things are all connected. And if you see those kinds of things happening, one, I would say, please do not approach these people. They're not your old-fashioned pipe-smoking poacher who's, the old guy from the village. They are criminal organizations. Do not approach them. Let the police deal with them. Report it to the police. Invasives and non-native species. Again, this is a big part of our environmental campaigning work. You probably know about things like pennywort, Himalayan balsam. You've also got things like the American signal crayfish, certainly in the rivers in Oxfordshire. We're starting to see now primarily in Scotland, in the northeast as well, pink Pacific salmon. They were introduced in Russia 30 years ago for farming, have obviously escaped from Russia and gradually made their way around the Baltics and round to the top of Scotland and then are gradually coming down through the UK. They've been found in Ireland as well. Pacific pink salmon will eat all salmon eggs that they can find, and they will outcompete our native Atlantic salmon for spawning grounds, etc. Then you've got things like killer shrimps. Just last week, I do my testing, my invertebrate testing on the River Pang. I do in partnership with Action for the River Kennet, and one of the invertebrate samplers for Action for the River Kennet found a killer shrimp, and I can't remember if it was a killer shrimp or a demon shrimp from the lambone. So they are in our area, and they're very destructive. They'll overtake in most cases, the invasive species will overtake the native species, outcompete them for either food or for land, etc. We have a big program against this, and sometimes it will be combined with a litter pick, or it might be combined with a day of testing the water, really reporting through to the EA and specific actions taken on things like Himalayan balsam, doing balsam bashing days, pulling it out, etc. And a huge amount of angling trust time goes into trying to manage, and that's the only word I can use, manage floating pennywort. We will never get rid of it now. It really outcompetes, it crashes the oxygen level. It's extremely difficult to deal with. You only need a tiny little bit of the root to restart the whole thing again. And in some places, especially in the summer, you can literally, with your own eyes, see it grow. It will grow, a few centimeters in an hour. So you'll go along, you'll clear a stretch out or a little patch to fish in, and by the time you've stopped fishing at the end of the day, some of that will grow back. Floating pennywort's a huge problem and is going to need a scientific solution to the looking at whether they can genetically alter some of the pennywort in the top end of rivers so that when it comes down the rivers, it then kills the other pennywort. Invasive non-native species are also driven by climate change. The warmer our climate gets, the more different species can survive in it. Things like mitten crabs, zebra mussels are accelerated by climate change and put additional pressures on the rivers. Again, two things that you could do. If you're working in rivers, please be very aware that your kit, whether that be your waders or whether that be net or even your water testing kit, check, clean, dry before you go to another river system. Make sure that there's nothing actually on it, i.e. shrimps. And you do get, if you're using a net to do invertebrate sampling, you do get lots of shrimps caught in the net. You'll know that. Making sure that your kit is then checked, cleaned and dried before you move to another river system is really, really important. I actually, here, my waders are drying out. I use a separate pair of waders for the Pang. And then I know that when I'm in there doing the water quality testing, whether it's litter, whether it's cleaning stuff out of the river, I only use those rivers and those waders in the Pang. And when I go elsewhere, I've got a separate pair of waders that I use and then dry out. So one, check, clean and dry. And two, if you do see any of these things, report them through to the EA. You can use it on the mapping tool. American signal crayfish, obviously everyone knows they're there. I wouldn't be reporting them, but certainly, if you're seeing zebra mussels, or if you are doing invertebrate sampling, finding killer or demon shrimps, they should be reported as well. All of this stuff is brought together in, as I say, our environmental campaigns, and what that helps us do is advance policy and environmental advocacy. We have strong relationships with DEFRA and with the EA. We're partly funded by the Environment Agency, but we also push back on the Environment Agency where we need to. We manage a political all-party parliamentary group on angling, so that helps us get angling issues onto the agenda in the House of Commons and the House of Lords. And the kinds of things that we do. So at the moment, we've got a lot of focus on the Water Special Measures Bill and how that might change the water services industry going forward. And then also we're starting to look at the newly announced bathing water consultation, which is, looking at bathing zones on rivers and who should be defined as a bather, etc. And then also a big lot of work, which I haven't really mentioned, of up to rivers here, is a lot of our policy work is marine policy focused. Everything from recreational marine protected areas, i.e. we're not going to have angling in those areas, to inshore netting and how that affects the fish population, especially on key species like bass and pollock. So one example to give you is that the Angling Trust actually worked on the inshore pollock catch, in that now previously even as a recreational angler, you could go and catch as many pollock as you wanted and take them all away, even if they were undersized. Whereas now there's a size limit, as there is in bass, and that you can only take 2 fish a day from certain fisheries. So that is the kinds of things that we advance, as well as all of our sewage campaigning, work that we do with partnership groups like the catchment partnerships all around the country, and also big activities like you will have seen the recent big March for Clean Water in London, where there was some 300 anglers, were part of that. All of these things connect together through the environmental work, through the criminal and legal work. The other thing I would also mention, I should have mentioned earlier, is that Fish Legal, who some of you may have heard of, are the country's finest river legal experts. They're the only people in the country who have successfully prosecuted water companies for sewage pollution, and have been doing that since 1948. Fish Legal represent the angling community when it comes to protection of fishing rights, and also impacts from pollution, be that sewage, agricultural, etc. And you'll often see Fish Legal moving forward cases which can then be applied to the whole country. One of these is actually going to come to fruition in the court in early January. Fish Legal are working with a group called the Pickering Anglers and taking forward a test case that says the Environment Agency have not done enough to protect the Pickering Anglers fishery from sewage pollution. That case was taken under the last government. Unfortunately, the last government, even though the court had supported that decision, the last government had decided to appeal it, costing your taxpayers money in appealing that decision through the Court of Appeal. Unfortunately, this government have decided that they're going to continue with that appeal, even though the court has already said. And the reason that the government is going to take forward that appeal is, if that legal precedent stands, it can be applied to every single river in the UK, i.e. here on the Pang, my fishing club, we all pay a few £100 a year to fish it, and our rights as fishermen are being impacted by Thames Water continually leaking sewage into the river. That's what that case says, and it could be applied nationwide, and that is why the government are appealing it, because it's so significant. I hope that gives you a picture of what it is that I do, why I'm involved in it, why I care, and also what the Angling Trust does in terms of helping to protect, promote, and develop angling on behalf of anglers and angling clubs around the country. I'm very, very happy to take questions. Sam, you're on mute.
Oh, apparently, sorry, you didn't get any of that. Thank you so much. A lot of what you're saying is definitely, replicated along the River Evenlode for us. And yeah, we hear all your frustrations, and we're just really glad, that you're fighting the good fight and can share all this information on how actually we can help make these changes and make these reportings and help. What I'll do now is I'll open up the floor. If anyone's got any questions, you can raise your real hand or your virtual hand. Oh, Jennifer!
Jump in first. Sorry. Yeah, well, a couple of things. Pete, right now outside my door, we've got an attenuation pond, and we have the invasive species water primrose, which is also getting into the waterways. And I know that the Environment Agency is really, really keen to keep it from going anywhere. So we've got a big digger that is literally dredging out the whole bottom of our pond to try and get rid of it. because it can go downstream, and then we're into trouble. But I was curious, where I come from in the States, if you fish along the rivers or lakes, you catch with confidence, and you generally eat what you catch. Does that not happen at all in this country? And if so, aren't people at significant health risk?
I was brought up on eating wild brown trout and very, very, very occasionally Scottish salmon. If it had been given to my dad or if he'd caught one when he was trout fishing. I wouldn't advise anyone to eat a trout from a river, especially not in the south of England. Maybe if you caught a trout from the Welsh, the Tarns up, or from a Scottish river, you'll actually find very few fishermen catch and kill nowadays. Up until maybe the 1980s, that was quite regular for a trout would be to catch and kill and eat it. Coarse fish are different. I should say straight away that two different types of fish. One is game fish, which trout, salmon, and grayling, primarily char as well. Coarse fish are pike, chub, perch, roach, rudd, all of those things. Those coarse fish have never really been taken for the table, not in the UK. Some caught by some communities, but not really. The fish that have tended to be taken for the table historically have been trout or salmon. That's not nearly as predominant nowadays in rivers. Most of the trout that are taken for eating will have been caught from a stocked reservoir. They'd primarily be rainbow trout, not wild brown trout in a river. I know that going back to the Pang has a legacy mercury problem. There were lots of different mills on the River Pang way back in the day. Mercury was used as a very cheap and easily accessible. It was used to wash down sheep with and things like that. The mercury just ends up in the silt and has stayed there for hundreds of years. I'm currently looking at doing some testing of crayfish and wild brown trout from the Pang, and what we will probably find is high levels of mercury in the livers of the fish, and certainly in the meat of the crayfish as well. I wouldn't encourage it. So please.
Is that something that other catchments can get involved in as far as getting like our crayfish tested? Because I think we've been told that they are pretty contaminated.
Yeah.
It'd be interesting to see what the contamination kind of bioaccumulation is within the crayfish of forever chemicals.
It's something that I'm looking for an academic partner that I can set up a project with, and that we can do this a bit wider and choose few different sample rivers from around the country. Go back to fish kills. If you see someone killing a fish on a river nowadays, I wouldn't want to say it absolutely shouldn't be happening, but it would be unusual to see. And outside of somewhere in Wales or Scotland, you'd have to be asking yourself why that person is doing that. Not that I eat fish. I enjoy eating fish, and fish is my favorite food. And I'm very, absolutely fine with someone knocking on the head of a rainbow trout caught from a fishery and taking that to smoke or cook or whatever. Fine, not a problem. I think the fish populations in the trout, and especially very unusual nowadays that someone would catch and kill a salmon unless they really had to because of the condition of the salmon, or maybe one a year to keep for the table, but very, very few salmon anglers nowadays will be catching to kill. And certainly amongst the coarse fishermen, you will never see better fish care than you will amongst carp fishermen in these massive, great big fat carp that you can barely hold up. They're treated like jewels. They really are very well cared for and returned so that someone can catch them the next time.
Going to crime fighting. I mean, I used to fish as a kid with my dad, and we used to see the Environment Agency on the riverbanks constantly. You'd have your permits at the ready to show them. Has it been the problems of resourcing that the EEA has been experiencing that has actually maybe increased this crime? Maybe they haven't got the reputation that they once had?
Absolutely. I think that poachers know where they can go and know that they won't be challenged because of the lack of enforcement staff. It's one of the reasons that we as the Angling Trust have had to build up our enforcement staff. I've never been asked I've been fishing since I was a wee boy. I've never been asked for my fishing license, not one. The kind of places that, to tell you the truth, when I go to a commercial fishery, like somewhere like Sportfish, I have to show my license before I buy a ticket. But I've never been just challenged for it on the bank by an environment agency person. You're a lot more likely to be asked for your fishing license by one of the Angling Trust enforcement staff, volunteers, than you are by an environment agency. That's not to discredit the environment agency. They have been severely underfunded, and where they can make those cost savings are maybe in areas like that rather than areas of specific delivery on where they really, really have to spend the money.
Has anyone else got another question? We had a comment from Chris to say, thank you so much, Pete, for the opportunity for a brilliant, if not depressing, crash course in all things river conservation through the eyes of a community of anglers. Licensed anglers and Angling Trust have definitely become some of my favourite people.
And thank you for saying that, Chris. It's much appreciated. I wouldn't want people to take away. It is challenging to fish in a time of sewage crisis, but it's still great to go fishing. I still do it. I still really enjoy it. I go to the Pang and I catch fish. Amazingly, the Pang and lots of other rivers still have great populations of fish in them. Fish don't suffer from E. coli. They don't suffer from enterococci. We can throw an awful lot of stuff at them before the population really begins to suffer. But we are at that time where we're at a precipice, maybe not for the individual fish, but for the river ecosystems, that if we don't step in and save the ecosystems, we've got a limited amount of time to be able to do so.
Julian, you've got your hand raised.
Hi there. Peter, thank you so much. So much of what you said resonated with me. Thank you for all the work of the Angling Trust. Fish Legal's Pickering case could, as you say, be extraordinary. So much to say. I won't be able to say it all, but yeah, I mean, my upbringing, like yours, was that a few trout from the local stream and a bit of brown bread and butter was part of my childhood. And yeah, the occasional salmon. My great mentor, who I talked about in a similar online event to this for the catchment group. Incredibly, he was with his son up in Scotland, Ellen, I think it's the River Ithen up there, and his whole family were there. His son was head of drilling for BP in the North Sea, so a nice setup. And he spotted a salmon in the river on this day when the whole family were there. And he was getting quite elderly and frail. He caught the salmon, he gutted it, he fed his family, and then he died. Quite extraordinary. Sorry for sharing that, maybe a bit too much information. But yeah, for me, the whole fishing thing was about food on the table. That's not to say you shouldn't go out and fish for a carp or a pike or anything else. I think public attitudes are changing in terms of all sports involving animals. So, but I've always been a food fisherman. You didn't talk much about agricultural pollution. Please, understand, if you look at the data, for example, the eels and migratory salmonids are under attack from all sorts of quarters and levels, from overfishing at sea to bloody fish farms in estuaries up in Scotland to the Pacific salmon coming in, and so on and so on and so on. But very clearly, in terms of the huge collapse in those species in the EU and the UK in my lifetime, there is one family of chemicals which the evidence clearly indicates is a major contributor, and that is veterinary wormers. So the moment they were introduced in the 1980s, we saw a collapse coinciding exactly with their introduction in both salmon, sea trout, and eels. In terms of the issue of, and I'll give you a moment to respond in a minute. I just wanted to say one other thing. This whole question of licensing and permissions to fish, absolutely. You have to get permission from a riparian owner. They are the true guardians of any fishing resource, and you need to respect and support their views. Licenses from the Environment Agency, sorry, I differ with you. In fact, a funny story, if you can bear another minute. I was going hammer and tongs at both the Environment Agency and the newly privatized water companies in 1989, and they couldn't deal with my written point. So they suggested a meeting at an Environment Agency weir on the River Severn. And a senior pollution control man was delegated the job of meeting with me and having a friendly talk through these issues. His first question was, of course, well, now, Mr. Jones, before we start fishing, I need to see your fishing license. My response was very clear then, and it would be now. In issuing me a license, are you saying that this river is safe for me to have direct contact with? He, of course, wasn't able to say that, and certainly even less likely to do so now. So I suggest, and in terms of Lower Severn, I think we've gone from a peak of 27 pollution control officers to now 2. And considering the collapse in fisheries, not just from sewage, but also from agricultural contaminants, highway runoff, we really now need to be challenging our angling licenses. This is long overdue. I think there is a criminality in the issuing of licenses for fishing, boating, paddleboarding, because in doing so, they know that you are very likely to be in direct contact with sewage pathogens. I'll stop there. Loads more, but thank you, and I'd be interested in your comments.
Thank you, Julian. They're interesting points. Taking it back to the Pang, I always start with my river. The pollution in the Pang is about 50-50 split between the sewage works and agriculture. And that's primarily through the studies of Action for the River Kennet that we know that. I'm always very hesitant. I really don't like criticizing farmers, partly because as anglers, we all rely on their riparian rights and to be able to go fishing, farmers, landowners. I think the issues with farming are at the policy level rather than at the farming level. I don't think many farmers, if any farmers, start the day thinking, how can I bugger up that river at the bottom of my field?
I totally agree.
I think they are forced into a really bad situation through policy and through the supermarkets where they have to cut costs right back to the bone. And so these things inevitably happen. The additional pressures from highways. The Highways England are the only agency in the country, apart from the Ministry of Defence, that don't need planning permission for anything they do. They can turn up and dig a hole in your back garden and say, thank you very much, and leave. The Pang itself goes underneath the M4 twice, and we know that a real part of our problem is coming from the runoff from all of the horrible stuff that comes off the motorway. In terms of and so there are all these really complex issues that we need to keep trying to address. Sewage is one of the easiest ones, actually, because it is regulated. You have to have a license, you have to have a permit. Whether that permit's in breach or not is another discussion, but you have water companies, you have licenses, you have sewage plants. It's actually fairly easy to. And now you even have information telling you when those sewage plants are not operating properly. So it's fairly easy to drill down. Agriculture is harder, roads are even harder, and that's where we're going to need to go as campaigners to keep improving the river quality. On licenses, I hear what you're saying. I often think, what am I paying my license for? As a member of the Angling Trust, and I have a wee bit of a different view on that. It does partly pay my salary because the Angling Trust is funded partly by Environment Agency license money from anglers. Your point about issuing those licenses when they know that water is not suitable for the conditions that license is being given, absolutely right. And that is a big part of what we're going to be challenging in the bathing water consultation that's coming up, simply by putting a whole bunch of other people, qualifying them as bathers, does not do anything for the ecology of the river, doesn't do anything to improve the water quality, and could expose people to further risk. The more bathing sites that you have registered, the more people might think, oh, it's a bathing site, I can go and use it, not knowing what is actually in the water, not knowing about the water quality. The other thing I would say on licenses is, I personally, just personal anecdote, when I have problems on our local river, I'm the secretary for the Pang as well. When we have problems, I can guarantee you those folks don't have a fishing license. You know, they're not the guys who go to the post office or women who put a direct debit, you know, in place to buy a fishing license every year. I doubt they even have a driving license, never mind a fishing license, even though they've turned up in a van. And then that leads to other criminality. So I use the analogy of you used to back in the day when I was a little boy and I got my first dog, you had to have a dog license. You had to go to your post office and you had to buy a license that says you're a dog keeper. It kind of, to me, it's like the first tick in the box. If you can't be bothered to do that thing, i.e. go and get a license, what else are you going to go and do on the river? So I totally hear you, Julian. What's my money being spent on at the EA? What's my license money being spent on? How's it being used? And is there as you put it, you know, is that license being issued under the conditions it should be? No, it's not. But I do feel as a responsible angler that I should have a license, that I should continue to contribute to the angling community. And that money does enable if it doesn't do anything else, it enables the Angling Trust to put in place a lot of good projects protecting rivers, you know, be that from predation, be that in other ways, protecting anglers' access, etc. And it allows us to run campaigns like we do in the environment. So I'll do a sales job and say that, Julian, even if you weren't happy for the Environment Agency to take your money for a license, maybe be a wee bit happy about it, that a wee bit of that money goes on to the Angling Trust.
And a question. Hand up.
Sorry. Because on the last couple of episodes, we've talked about, you know, the risks of going into the water with microbes and exposure. And something that I think Sam and I have talked on before is, you know, to whom do we report if we get sick? You know, there is no national body, as far as I know, that is collecting all of these sick reports, but we've got no idea how many people or how many dogs. You know, we had a dog that nearly died because it went into the even load. You know, if we aren't capturing this information from people that are accessing the water, then, you know, we really don't have much ground to stand on by way of saying it is really polluted. People shouldn't be going in. And this is something that we talk about within the ECP, because we encourage children into the river to learn about river water surveying and stuff like that as part of their education and curriculum. How can we do that in a sense, knowing that it's polluted? You know, we do look to see when sewage is flowing, but that doesn't mean that it's all gone. It doesn't just disappear, you know, after 48 hours. So
it's certainly, that's the first step that we can all take, is we, you know, before we organize a big litter pick or something in the water, we do look at the sewage reports from upstream. It's the first and, you know, most sensible step that you could take. It's never going to fully protect you, because goodness knows what else is going to be in it, how long it's going to stay in it, etc. There's also the, you know, the good practice advice on if you have cuts or anything like that. Your point on reporting sickness is a really, really good point. I just get random emails from anglers saying, hey, this is how we had a guy last year who almost lost his leg, an elderly chap in up in the north on the Tyne, who had a cut. He got infected. He ended up in hospital for a month, and they only just managed to save his leg. We had another guy just over on the River Loddon in Berkshire who he's on dialysis. And then he went to the river and got really sick, and really, you know, he was touch and go. He nearly killed him. It's a really good point that you make on how are we reporting these things, because the Angling Trust get individual reports. other groups. I think it's a good point that I can raise with some of I sit on the Wildlife and Countryside link that links together a lot of different campaigning groups. I think it's a really good point, actually.
And I would think that actually, with River Action and Surfers Against Sewage, we could all collaborate and encourage our followers and our members to do this. I know a mother who contacted me, and she attended a birthday party that was on Bankside, and in the Cherwell, and she suggested that people not go into the water. And every single child that went in had vomiting sickness within 24 hours. I think it's happening quite a lot, and it's underreported. So it would be great if actually, a group of organizations could come together and create some sort of a database where people could report into. It's got pollution of numbers. Why not?
It's a really good idea.
Quick question from me before we wrap up. You mentioned at the beginning of the webinar that the River Pang is tested monthly. Is that because it's a chalk stream? Because I'm just aware that a lot of our monitoring is not quite that often.
We test it on a monthly basis. The anglers test it.
Is it the EA said you did it annually?
That's a really good question. I'm going on to a call in 2 minutes' time with the Pang catchment group. And I can ask how often the EA and Thames Water also do their own testing on it. We're trying to get everyone to share that data into one place through the Environment Agency, so that the Angling Trust data would sit there on a map alongside Action for the River Kennets, the EAs, and the water companies as well. That would then, there's a big project called Casco, which has unfortunately been going on for about 2 years, of how to report this all into one place. It's exactly, as Jennifer's saying, is how we report in sickness. We're a couple of stages ahead on pollution, but we actually need a national database from all the citizen science, voluntary reporting, as well as the information from the agencies. And I can only guess that the agencies will keep pushing back on that.
Yeah. Just so everybody knows, I've put something in the chat about the chalk stream strategy. There's a meeting on the 11th of December from 9:30. You can book online. There's an email there in case you're interested. And Sam, I think you've got one final question about a book.
Yes, Pete, we ask every guest towards the end of our webinar, what is your favourite or most inspirational book that you can maybe recommend for us to go out and look for?
I haven't read it for a long time, but Von Chenard set up Patagonia, and donkeys years ago. It's quite an old book now. He wrote a book called Let My People Go Surfing, and it was about how he runs Patagonia and why Patagonia was so good, because it was formed by anglers, by climbers, by mountaineers, by country people, and about how letting them do their thing, i.e. let my people go surfing, which kept the heart in the business. And to finish off that, say that's what the Angling Trust is. We're anglers for anglers. It's people like me who care about angling, who go angling, trying to do a better thing for the angling community.
I think Patagonia is it's one of those organizations or companies that's really pushing forward. They've reduced all of the forever chemicals and whatnot out of their clothing. And if you're in the environmental industry, you can get a professional discount. Just top tip for anybody looking for a new waterproof this winter.
Yeah.
They gave me 25 quid off my new Patagonia very fancy waders.
Oh, very nice. I'll have to go shopping. Thank you again, Pete, for your time, your knowledge. It's been fascinating.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. Really appreciate it.
Going forward, you can find out who our presenters are coming up if you follow us on social media, Instagram, Facebook, or X.
Thank you very much.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Bye.
Cheerio.
Bye. Bye.
Bye-bye.